When it occurred, the school hallway was bustling with activity. Max, the undisputed king of Roosevelt High, had been observing the new girl for weeks, and something about her reserved manner bothered him. She refused to accept the social hierarchy. He ruled, and when she finally made the decision to reveal her face, Max cried out to his group of buddies who were standing like a barrier around him. Emma stood in her locker carefully arranging her books. She reacted, but very few people did. Max became irritated and said, "Hey, new girl, I'm talking to you." The hallway became quiet as students realized that the brewing encounter was taking place and that phones were filming what would undoubtedly be the day's most juicy rumor. Emma's demeanor became neutral. "Can I help you with something?" Max asked. "You may quit pretending to be superior to everyone by getting closer." "I don't have a problem. What's yours?" Max was enraged by Emma's calm and steady response, saying, "You think you're special, don't you?" Emma looked right at him. "But I believe that each of us is unique in our own way." The noises appeared to disappear as Max's palm sliced through the atmosphere, and the slap that Emma felt against her cheek reverberated into the quiet hallway. As everyone waited for Emma to cry, a scarlet stain began to appear on her pale face as she slowly turned back to face him. Skin. And then she gave Max a small smile that made him take an unconscious step back, or whatever freak he was muttering as he retreated with his buddies. Emma stood by herself, caressing her cheek reflectively as the kids scattered. And none saw the elderly man at the far end of the corridor, who was silently observing in faded jeans with his hat pulled down. His face was obviously hidden around the corner before anybody could see it. The time displayed on the wall was 12:07 p.m. Emma arrived at Roosevelt High 3 weeks prior with little fanfare. The principal gave the customary, "Please welcome our new student" speech to her first class, but Emma didn't provide any personal information. She answered questions politely and succinctly, disclosing nothing about her prior school or the reason for her midterm move. Emma was like a ghost. Lily whispered to her friend during lunch that there was no Instagram, TikTok, or even Facebook in 2025. Emma was an exception, but what really made her stand out was her self-control. She wasn't aloof. She smiled at greetings and held doors open, thanking the cafeteria staff. But she maintained an invisible barrier that no one had broken until Max broke it with his palm. Now, sitting in history class, Max couldn't concentrate because the smile kept flashing in his mind, not one of forgiveness or amusement, but something else entirely, knowing Mr. Reynolds, the Treaty of Rye. The teacher's voice broke through his thoughts, and Max's eyes automatically. Max later overheard Emma talking to a freshman who dropped his lunch tray in the cafeteria. Her gaze drifted to Emma for rows ahead, and she turned slightly as if sensing his gaze. Their eyes met for a brief moment, without anger or fear, just that same steady look that somehow made him feel transparent. Silently, she assisted in gathering the strewn food, saying that those who are afraid of appearing silly seldom achieve anything significant. The simple knowledge in her voice held an unexpected weight, as if someone much older were speaking through her. Max dreamed of the slap that night. But in the dream, his hand flowed through Emma as though she were made of smoke, and her smile widened, revealing too many teeth. Max woke up at 3 in the morning. Sweating, grabbing his phone, he scrolled through social media, mentions of a new girl. Nothing substantial, just variations of weird and mysterious. One comment from a senior on the wrestling team gave him pause. Something about her eyes, man, like she's seen things we haven't. Max closed his phone, but couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a terrible mistake. Not a moral one, but a tactical one, like poking something that should have been left alone. By morning, the video of Max slapping Emma had spread through the school's unofficial messaging groups like wildfire. Comments range from shock to awkward humor, with timestamps showing the clip being shared every few minutes. But something peculiar was happening. The video kept disappearing. taken down almost as quickly as it would reposted what's happening. Max texts his friend Tyler, fingers tapping impatiently against his phone case. "Who's removing it? No idea, man," came to reply. 3 minutes later, 1 minute. "It's there next, it's gone. Some people saying it gets reported for violence immediately, like within seconds of posting. That's impossible." Max wrote back, "Someone must be watching all the time, and perhaps they are." In response, Tyler added a shrugging emoji, which annoyed Max more than it ought to have. When Max slid into his customary seat at the center table at lunch, expecting his entourage to close ranks around him, he tried to laugh off. Instead, he discovered half the spots are unfilled with muttered explanations about makeup tests and study groups, and the friends who do turn up keep an awkward quiet while frequently looking at their phones. As he went by a group of sophomore females, whispers followed him across the cafeteria. Their expressions were a mix of interest and fresh criticism. Underclassmen who would often leap to his aid found excuses to avoid making eye contact with him. Tyler, who appeared to be getting more interested in his mac and cheese, demanded greetings from Max, who was noticeably missing. "What's up with everyone today?" Tyler paused and looked around, hearing people say things that suggested Emma wasn't simply a new girl. There might be repercussions. When Coach Bennett, who typically gave him a warm shoulder slap, walked by him in the corridor without saying anything when Max tried to catch up with him by calling Coach regarding Friday's game strategy, Max scoffed, but his gut grew uneasy. After entering his office, the coach vanished with a curt, "Not now." A tightly shut door in chemistry class, and Reynolds Max's laboratory associate Bethany requested that she change groups with Mr. Simmons. Simply put, "Emma's cousin attends my church," which she said incoherently when Max approached her after class. Emma no longer has a cousin. Max reacts without thinking about how he learned this knowledge or why he had even noticed such a detail. He said, "I just don't want trouble. My dad told me to keep out of it and stay out of what Max pressed," but Bethany just shook her head and rushed away that afternoon. Max spun the combination on his locker and yanked it open with more force than was necessary, sending a crisp, cream-colored envelope fluttering across the floor. No name, no identifying marks, just heavy stationery that felt pricey between his fingers and was sealed with real wax like something from another century. He looked up and down the hallway, suddenly aware that he was being watched, and then he shoved the envelope into his pocket. He waited until he was by himself in a lavatory before tearing it open, revealing a single note card with 2 words and tasteful handwritten script. We recall Max staring at the card. The cursive flowing across his hand trembled a little as he turned the card over and found nothing on the back. He crumpled the card and tried to flush it, but it wouldn't go down. The thick paper floated stubbornly on the water's surface. He fished it out, grimacing, and stuffed a wet mess into his pocket instead of jumping when the bathroom door opened with a creak. The heavy stock paper had an almost artistic quality and spoke of tradition and deep-rooted power. Principal Wilson walked in, his footsteps resonating on the tile floor, and his eyes narrowed slightly as he met Max's in the mirror. "Mr. Reynolds, I have an office tomorrow morning at precisely 8. As Max walked home, taking a long route to avoid teammates who might ask questions, his phone vibrated with a notification. Max forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to his own ears. "What's this about the principal studying him?" His expression was unreadable, and I believe you know that he paused before quietly adding some actions of consequences that even your father can't erase. Coach Bennett posted a message on the basketball team's group chat. Sunday practice was cancelled till further notice. 3 teammates departed the group with their profile pictures, and a quick series of notifications followed. Max stopped walking and stared at his phone as each one vanished, seeing that his kingdom wasn't just collapsing, but was being methodically destroyed. Since Emma's arrival, Miss Davis, the school guidance council's 23-year veteran and well-known for knowing each student's background, has been attempting to set up an introductory meeting for her. This is standard procedure for transfer students to discuss adjustment, prior academic records, and possible college plans. Nothing intrusive, just standard. After 3 weeks of Emma's courteous postponing, Davis eventually dug deeper into her file, anticipating the customary transfer papers, transcripts, and test results. Maybe some strange remarks from past instructors, she muttered as she adjusted her reading glasses and gazed at her computer screen, which is where student records typically display comprehensive data. Emma's file included a straightforward message in stark red text on a white background that read, "Access Restricted Federal Security Protocol 1972. You can see a government seal and the phone number of Colonel James Harwick, a Department of Defense liaison officer, with a DC area code below that." Davis thought it might be a technical issue and tried clicking on several sections in the system, but each time she got the same message, she picked up her phone, hesitated with her finger over the liaison number, and put it down again. She called her colleague Tom Anderson, a computer science teacher whose military experience occasionally helped her navigate bureaucratic mazes, right away because this needed a second perspective. When he answered, she whispered, "I need you to see something." Her voice was unusually tense in my office, and Anderson arrived 5 minutes later, a little breathless. Davis closed the door behind him, double-checking that it was closed. "I've never seen anything like this," she said, turning her monitor so he could see Emma's file. "What does this even mean?" As he nervously adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the television, Anderson's look changed from one of curiosity to upon discovering that Protocol 1972C is a Pentagon designation. It was unexpected. "I only know because my brother works in government cybersecurity," he said softly, running a hand through his thinning hair. "This is high-level stuff like family members of intelligence assets or people in witness protection, sometimes diplomatic families, or those connected to high-ranking officials." Emma Davis uttered the words, "It seems so normal." "That's typically the point," Anderson said with a gloomy nod. Davis bit her lip as she said that unless you want to visit from those who don't properly introduce themselves, we shouldn't contact liaison. In a school setting where secrets were valuable, Anderson responded to my advice processor by saying, "Like any other student, don't ask questions, don't make special accommodations, and don't draw attention to her." By lunchtime, their hushed conversation in Davis's office might as well have been broadcast over the public address system. Bits of information had passed from an administrative assistant to a student assistant to a substitute teacher, becoming increasingly twisted with each repetition of the rumor to the teacher. Lounge like wildfire that finally reaches kids' ears through misheard bits, misconstrued looks, and the effective gossip network at school. I overheard her father, a CIA sophomore, suddenly lowering his voice as he spoke at his lunch table. "She relocated here because of deep cover stuff." A third person suggested that she pick at her salad like a government-famous Secretary of State's niece or something in the gym storage room. Coach Bennett was getting basketballs for his 5th period class when he heard 2 janitors whispering to each other across the wire cage. My cousin, who works at City Hall, recounted another, saying it's witness protection. I mentioned that it was her eyes. "Distribute it." Using his faces as support, the senior caretaker remarked. The younger one questioned with skepticism in his voice, which seemed implausible. Bennett recognized him as Frank, who had worked at Roosevelt since before Bennett had been a student there. The elderly man gave a somber nod. "I only saw our grandfather once, in the 1990s, and it was like they could see right through you." When I looked up Arlene Norris from '82 in the Arch IES yearbook this morning, I saw that she had the same eyes as Chuck Norris, and I didn't believe it either. When Bennett dropped the ball he was holding, and it bounced loudly against the concrete floor, both caretakers turned sharply towards the storage cage. Bennett apologized, saying that he didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the older caretaker fixed him with a penetrating stare. Some things are better left undisturbed, coach, for everyone's sake. His daughter, Valienne, turned down Harvard to join the Air Force. Bennett nodded as he gathered the basketballs with trembling hands, his thoughts racing at what Max Reynolds had just said and its consequences. After school, Max was running laps and exerting more effort than normal to outrun. When he first saw him, an older man standing close to the track's fence line was partially obscured by the afternoon shadows of the stands. The track was mostly deserted, with only a few committed cross-country runners circling at their own pace and not making eye contact. The loneliness should have disturbed him, but the rhythmic pounding of his feet against a rubberized surface had a calming effect that was almost meditative. The man was there every time he rounded a curve, his gaze following Max with unmistakable intensity. This was not casual observation. Rather, it was deliberate focus, assessment, and measurement of the kind of attention that made the skin on the back of Max's neck prickle despite the cool breeze. Jeans, a denim jacket, a cowboy hat pulled low over his forehead, arms crossed over his chest, stance wide and planted like someone used to holding their ground, was watching Max and concentrating on keeping his pace and controlling his breathing. Max couldn't take it any longer, so he slowed down and jogged to the edge of the track where his water bottle was sitting on a bench. "You need something," he called to the stranger, trying to sound casual, but hearing the edge in his own voice, the man didn't answer, didn't move, didn't even blink, just kept staring with eyes that seemed to pierce right through Max's practice. Pardo, removing the layers of confidence he had built up over the years of being untouchable. Coach Bennett came up behind the coach's comments, halted when he saw a standoff. "Reynolds, you're dropping your right shoulder on the corners." His pace dropped and then stopped entirely, as understanding, his face in the morning Mr. Reynolds' water, broke over back to the clipboard, clattered to the ground, and cracked against the asphalt. Bennett did not pick it up. Sir Bennett, not Ed. His tone had changed to one of respect for the man at the fence, and Max had never heard his coach speak in such a different way. "Is there anything we can do to help you?" At last, the visitor made a modest adjustment to his hat, pulling it back a little, exposing Mora's face, which was worn with experience rather than just age, and his beard, which was clipped neatly. Pepper, who was gray, kept his eyes on Max, at all times, evaluating him. "Come on, coach," he said softly, one hand moving to Max's shoulder and guiding him back towards the track. His fingers were shaking a little against Max's jersey. "Let's finish these laps." "Who is Max?" Pepper asked, keeping the question contained as they moved away. Bennett paused, turning to look over his shoulder at the actor Chuck Norris. "How come he's here?" Max's effort at mocking laughter was cut off by the tension in the room. The coach's face had become pale, highlighting his jaw's stubble in stark contrast to that of an actor. A 6-time world karate champion and an 8 black belt in Taekwondo, the man is legendary. "Why did you touch his blood, though?" With his gaze darting around as though the words themselves would be harmful, Bennett's voice fell to a whisper. Max felt a tangible sensation of weightlessness as Emma smacked his granddaughter, and he was filled with cold fear. Emma is only a strange new girl, and her mother is Arlene Norris, a class of '82. "I'm taking you away from Friday's game, Max. If I were you, I would begin trying to make this right as practice came to a close." The coach turned back towards the fence and swallowed hard. Quickly changing in the locker room, Max hurried to the parking lot without talking, making eye contact, or considering what this all meant. His Toyota stood where he had left it that morning, keys in hand, eager to get home and piece together what was going on, but something attracted his attention. He cautiously approached the small white rectangle hidden beneath the windscreen wiper, half expecting to see another cryptic message similar to the one in his locker. It was a single business card with a neatly printed address in the old part of town, no name, logo, or company affiliation, and the time was 4:00 p.m. tomorrow. Max glanced up, looking at the parking lot, the school's roofline, the tree line beyond the fence, and there was no sign of Chuck Norris. However, that made it even more unnerving because he seemed to be able to appear and disappear at will, watching from all directions. Suddenly, the card felt unbelievably heavy in Max's hand, the straightforward instructions carrying the way, to command rather than invitation. He pocketed it, his thoughts racing with potential solutions, none of which were comforting, and a car door behind him banged. Max startled, his heart pounding, and forced himself to laugh at his own anxiety. As he got into his own car, Max realized that for the first time in his life, he had everything to worry about. All he had to worry about was that he was just another student heading out for the day. In the principal's office by himself, the vinyl chair creaking uneasily under him every time he moved, he looked at his watch for the 5th time. 8:15 a.m. Principal. The office appeared different, not physically, but by context. The same diplomas and awards hung on the wall, the same antiquated computer hummed on the desk. But the atmosphere felt hostile, now a place of judgment instead of the small annoyance it had always been when his father's influence guaranteed leniency. Wilson was 15 minutes late to a meeting that he had called himself. The door finally opened with a soft click. Max straightened up and got ready to listen to Wilson Stern's ultimately pointless speech, but Mr. Harrington, the vice principal of the school, came in instead of the principal. Harrington was always the one who enforced rules and dealt with the pupils Wilson didn't have time to spend with, or whose parents weren't deserving of his undivided attention. Max apologized for keeping you waiting, but he didn't seem regretful. Instead, his tone was formal and clipped, lacking the cautious regard Max was used to from the principal of the school administration. Wilson requested me to handle things, as he had to leave on important business. "What's this about?" Max asked, trying to conceal his mounting uneasiness behind a facade of casual indifference, as Harrington crossed a pan on the wall that Max had never noticed before, pressed a series of buttons in succession, and a projection screen descended from the ceiling. The lights automatically dimmed, turning the office into an impromptu theater. The ACT perceived the transparent evidence as being thin. Harrington responded by merely pressing a remote control that had appeared in his hand. The screen then lit up with grainy but identifiable footage of a school hallway, showing Max pushing a freshman against a locker and the smaller boy's backpack spilling its contents on the floor. The timestamp in the corner read September 4th, just a few weeks into the current school year. And before Max could comment, the video cut to another hallway, another altercation, and a girl backing away as Max Tower. The video continues to roll on October 17th. Events that occurred during the 2 years of high school that Max hardly remembered, moments of true nastiness that he purposefully disregarded in the course of using his social power on a regular basis, preferred to keep a female instructor. He had coerced into altering a grade tier's name a secret. A student council member who was visibly upset when she changed the computerized gradebook, threatening him for opposing his. When there were few witnesses after hours, the prom theme concept backed against the lockers, and Emma finally got the slap. The clean sound was recorded in high-definition clarity from several viewpoints. Her smile was followed by a startled stillness over the workplace speakers. "Where did you hear these cracks?" in Max's voice, which exposed his false calm. "They were anonymously created and sent to each board member this morning since they were sorely wished to keep." Harrington clarified his tone of voice, stating that your mother, began to reply to explain or defend themselves. But Harrington raised his hand as the last clip started, was of different professional quality, and showed a training room with padded floors, obviously not from school surveillance film, brightly illuminated, immaculately clean walls and floors, Emma wearing clothes for her workout. The next 30 seconds were spent in close quarters with 2 adult guys wearing protective gear, control violence. Emma's series of moves, which demonstrated years of focused training, neutralized both opponents. "No compassion, no wasted action," Jesus, Max muttered, singing further into his Emma Norris. Chair is a third-degree black belt in Taekwondo, according to Harrington. As the TV went dark, she said softly that she is also a competitive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and CRA mega-athlete. The screen turned dark as she defended herself against you whenever she felt like it, and Max's pale complexion was gradually revealed by the lights coming up, along with the gleam of perspiration on his brow. Harrington kept collecting papers on his desk while his father waited outside, perhaps debating something. "There is a special assembly call scheduled for noon today in addition to the usual tardy. Slip, every student and faculty member must attend class, therefore Max stood on wobbly legs, am I right?" Said, "Expelled, that depends," as he looked up from his papers with an appearance that wasn't quite a smile on your listening skills during the assembly and your actions in the auditorium. Following confusion and excitement were high since school. Security had just hours earlier announced an emergency assembly. Station at every entry, guaranteeing that all students and faculty were present. During the morning, there was a lot of crazy speculation about the unusual attendance measure. Max remarked in class that his father was in the back row, as far away from the stage as possible. Next to him is James Reynolds, a well-known businessman and president of the school board. Since he had picked Ma up from the principal's office, the considerable contributor had not spoken. His often assured manner, there was a dismal, tight-lipped silence as the lights went down, replacing the faint smugness that came from always getting his way. Principal Wilson took the stage at precisely noon, without his usual appearance. He started off solemnly in a dark suit that appeared to have been selected for the seriousness of the situation. Rose oval was high. Introduce his amplified voice, instantly eliminating the murmuring and creating an intimate culture. A culture of quiet and repression that has persisted for too long and that I, as principal, have not adequately addressed. Talk to the big screen behind him that was lit up with the same montage Max had seen 2 years prior in the office. Several carefully recorded instances of bullying that ended with the slap that, in some way, served as a tipping point. Whispers echoed as the video played without any narrative, each incident speaking for itself. Max dropped lower in his seat as a number of studs turned to stare at him from the audience. James Reynolds whispered, "I've seen enough," longing fervently to become invisible. He had red veins evident at his temples and his face was flushed, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "What is this? We all know how teens can be, and my son made a mistake during the hunt." The microphone undoubtedly picked up the interruption, but Wilson went on as if he hadn't heard. "This behavior was made possible by programs that provide preference to some children over others, depending on factors like parental influence, athletic prowess, or wealth. System, of which I am eternally ashamed." The screen changed to show a fresh set of evidence of emails demonstrating pressure between Wilson and school officials, including James Reynolds to ignore Max's actions, hardly disguised threats of financial cuts, promises of providing money in return for lenient disciplinary action. Is defamatory, James. You're displaying private correspondence out of his chair, which was scraping loudly across the floor when Reynolds suddenly sprang up. Background, I'll have your work for this, and I'll replace the board as a whole. Marched towards the stage, his face twisted in a smug rage, and a side door. The man from the track, Chuck Norris, entered the theater silently near the front door and made his presence known right away. Following him, Emma walked with the same calm assurance she had displayed from the first day, drawing every iron room. When hundreds of youngsters realized they were watching something historic, the hall fell silent. Wilson moved away from the podium and gave up the microphone without saying a word, leaving behind the tiny universe of their school lives. Chuck Norris moved cautiously towards it, using fluid and accurate motions. Without exerting any effort, he commanded the room and looked around at the audience. The gaze was traveling purposefully across the sea. Many young features before ultimately locating Max and his father, who had halted his father's progress mid-stride. "You failed as that." The words hung in his voice as he spoke simply, "I won't," without raising it to the silent auditorium. Their impact was amplified for a considerable amount of time by their simplicity. No extensive speeches or specific charges. Simply said with unwavering conviction, without any long moral lessons. Despite Max hardly being there, a freshman girl in the front row wanted his previous victims before anybody could intervene. She clapped when she remembered her name, and the sound felt remarkably loud in the silence, was almost unwise in its audacity, but soon another pupil joined, and following that, the audience erupted in applause, and all of the students stood up. James Reynolds paused his advance and looked around to see whether anyone had turned as the cumulative sound grew louder. Against him, the innumerable witnesses to his public humiliation. And then he turned to face his kid, maybe for the first time. The golden boy, the top athlete and born leader, did not have the time to believe that he was raising. But the bully, who was made possible by the parents' blindness, for once, nothing could be done to fix the irreversible break in the meticulously built Reynolds facade. Or impact may change the narrative as Emma's applause dwindled. Chuck sank back towards the microphone, giving his granddaughter a small nod, a gesture so delicate that most missed it. But those who witnessed it intently could feel the tremendous pride in that token recognition and a total assurance that she could manage the situation coming up. "I didn't want this to happen," she said, her voice leveled despite the... When the microphone picked up, hundreds of eyes were on her. "I didn't hesitate or tremble. I just wanted to finish high, quietly. Just like any other student, learn, make some friends, and get ready for..." She halted, staring straight across the auditorium to where college was normally located. "When you slay me," I felt as though Max had created a bond between them that temporarily disconnected the hundreds of people. I could have reported if I had the option to protect myself physically, as I've been trained to do since I was 5. I could have fought back right away, Emma said quietly to her granddad. Behind her, others discreetly observe my grandfather and aspire to emulate him, an invincible, tough person who uses superior force to solve problems. With a softer whisper, went across the audience as Chuck Norris's identity was directly acknowledged. But the most difficult lesson he ever taught me about self-control, not fighting. Max sensed her eyes pinning him across the auditorium. "The most painful thing isn't physical, Emma. She can be seated more successfully than any physical constraint could," continued, adding a new level of emotion to her voice without losing its calm. She was being firm, but gentle. "Although you are capable, you are dismissed as helpless and silent when you have." She paused to say something, and I allowed her to look around the audience. "Not because I was weak, but because I was terrified. You slapped me to prove to everyone who you really are." She turned to address a larger audience, now easing the tight tension, because sometimes the truth requires witnesses. "Relationship with Max, this isn't about getting even. It's about making all of any instructor who turned a blind eye to bullying and did nothing is contributing to the issue. A parent who instilled in their child the belief that power entails never having to apologize took a big breath. "Emma, keep your cool, Max. I won't press charges, but I want you to," she said in a slightly quieter tone so that everyone could hear her say, "I'm not scared. I fear that you won't learn from being smacked, and that in 10 years it could be the father who instructs a son, the spouse who threatens his wife, or the boss who harasses staff." Justifies the complete quiet in the theater. Nobody moved. For once, no phone screens were illuminated in the dark, according to a whisper. In the present, realizing they were seeing something significant, But it ends here, Emma added. Not only. The microphone stood next to her, and she stepped aside for you, and all of us. When her grandfather softly touched her shoulder, it was the only obvious indication of Principal Wilson was moved when he returned to the center stage, writing despite the emotion that must have been running through him. Before he spoke, he stated that the board has decided to have a thorough anti-bullying policy in place. The program started working right away. He turned to face Reynolds. Max was sitting by himself on the school's campus, but the seats were vacant. A father and son had sneaked out during Emma's address. Steps taken by his father, who had just driven off in shame, his tires roaring and his voice murmured, threats of litigation that sounded hollow, even to Max, who had no script to follow for the first time in years, privileged to shield him as he had no solid way forward, and only Emma's voice could be heard, words and the realization of who he was and who he may become during the course of the following week flew by. Implications every day, presenting fresh information to the school community, and beyond, Max was given a 3 weekly required counseling sessions during a 30-day ban and 100 service hours devoted to anti-bullying campaigns, his roles on the basketball team, and his involvement in, until the end of the school year. His father's counsel was suspended pending review, confronting pressure from fellow board members and even legal action for meddling in school discipline. Emma returned to courses one day after he resigned his job and made a sincere speech about concentrating on family matters. Even though the assembly was still silent, her peers suddenly saw the enigmatic new girl differently. Swapped out for something more nuanced, a combination of celebrity by association and moral part authority, part regular adolescent attempting to make their way through high school. Some attempted awkwardly to. Despite the respectful distance she received from others, she handled both responses with the same composure, recognition. The tale quickly and unexpectedly extended outside Roseville's limits. Reaching people who had never identified had recorded the entire gathering on live streaming, including Wilson's introductory remarks and Emma's impressive address. And by the evening, clips were popular on CNN and other sites, and other prominent networks carried the story, concentrating mostly on a structural issue that had enabled Max's behavior to thrive uncontrolled for so long that local media set up shop outside the school in the hopes of speaking with Chuck or Emma. Neither Norris made any formal remarks, but Chuck did sign Paul's autograph once for a clearly odd. The only press Emma worked with as a rookie journalist was a student journalist from a tiny high school newspaper, and she had received a thoughtful message from someone in rural Texas on resisting harassment in settings where often written off as children being children. Bullying was discussed at their Chuck addressed her during the school's anti-bullying assembly the next month. Why are they not using the larger platforms? As you went home one evening, the sky was painted in striking oranges and purples that could have reached the millions. Emma shrugged, observing the neighborhoods beyond her window while your story went by. Schools are the target of huge platforms. Desire for dramatic, contentious, and outraged tales. She wants real change. People care about the message, not the person who delivered it. Her granddad smiled slightly and agreed. Crying the corners of his eyes, your grandma would be pleased since she used to say that genuine strength is demonstrated in the decisions we make while no one is watching. The Texas address video of Emma captured on a student's phone from the third row of a small gym without excellent lighting or clear sound. Although her statements had a wobbly camera angle and were occasionally obscured by other kids' heads, they were incredibly powerful. It's not about who you can harm, she said, adding value to cut through the digital cacophony of more polished stuff. Assembled students, her voice was able to carry naturally without the use of the malfunctioning microphone. It's about standing up for those who can't stand as well as for yourself. You can endure while remaining true to yourself. Despite their own interests, the videos went viral on social media, garnering millions of views in a matter of days. People's own stories of bullying were shared in the comment section, resulting In a movement that went beyond the parents viewed the original occurrence with their children, teachers played in schools, and athletes and celebrities shared it. Kids Max was by himself in his bedroom watching the movie. His face lit up by the light from his laptop in the dark, felt a feeling he couldn't quite place. Not resentment, not wrath. The defensive outrage his father still harbored held onto something that was more akin to acknowledging who he was and what he could. Otherwise, he would have opened a blank document and started penning an apology. Not for social media, not for public redemption, not to save his reputation, but for himself. And perhaps one day the words slowly came to Emma, gradually increasing in speed as he gave himself permission to discover the truth about who he had been and who he desired to be. His computer showed a timestamp of 12:07 p.m., precisely 1 week, following the slap it had, in hindsight, prevented him from killing himself 3 months later. A modest but effective Saturday morning youth session was held at a small martial arts studio on the outskirts of town. Basic banners showing the disciplined tenant's civility, mirrored walls, and spotlessly polished wooden floors. Emma travels in silence with integrity, perseverance, self-control, and an unbreakable spirit. Across the training floor, gently guiding 10 kids, ages 6 to 8, to adopt a young student. Position. The 13-year-old watched intently as she gave instructions for a wider base. Power originates when she subtly pushes the boys' trainers apart with her foot. Stability. If your foundation is weak, everything that is put on top of it will sink. Max stood clumsily in the entryway as the door chimed and a new guest entered. Staring, he switched from wearing luxury clothes to jeans and a basic t-shirt, and his meticulously maintained hair was chopped short, pragmatic, but the most obvious shift was in his stance and facial expression. His arrogant assurance was swapped out for something more subdued and sincere had clearly been left behind by the therapy sessions. Emma nodded and acknowledgement, but kept instructing while showing the group of kids a basic blocking technique. Using different levels of coordination, imitate their actions. She told them that we should memorize a block before we power. Max observed from the sidelines as he learnt to hit protection first. She patiently and precisely completed the lesson, correcting and encouraging without ever raising her voice. Instead of criticizing them, he approached cautiously when the lesson concluded and parents came to pick up their kids. When your grandfather responded, "You might let me join," his customary assurance was noticeably lacking. If the invitation is still valid, Emma looked at him for a second. She gestured to the changing area at the back of the studio where the training uniform is in their first size that fits you. We started with meditation instead of fighting, and Max hesitated, one hand on the door to the changing room. "Can I ask you something that day? You could have destroyed me and embarrassed me right there in front of everyone. You had every right, why didn't you?" Emma started rolling up the training mats, her movements deliberate and efficient because revenge continued cycles. Explained Max, listened to her remarks with a cautious nod before moving to assist her with the remaining mats. For a brief while, they worked in silence on the straightforward physical chore that connected their two very different worlds. A small student, maybe 7 years old, who had loose shoelaces and missing front teeth, came up to watch Max with unmasked excitement. "Are you a black belt too?" he said, his eyes wide. Would teenagers be treated with the same implicit reverence that children do? Max shook his head, grinning a little. "No, not even close, just starting." The boy looked disappointed for a second, but then brightened. "That's okay," Emma said, paraphrasing with a smile. "Miss Norris is the best teacher ever. She knows everything about fighting, but the best fight is the one you don't have." "I don't know everything, Tyler. I just know what my grandfather taught me." "Is he famous or something?" the child inquired, looking at the wall's simple black and white pictures of Chuck Norris during his competitive days. Nothing extravagant or emotionally stimulating. According to my dad, he appeared in films. Emma raised her head to meet Max's gaze. For a short while, they understood that fame and reputation were possibly the least significant components of a person's legacy, and something unsaid went between them. I'm sure you've heard of my granddad. Her lips curled into a little smile, but that isn't why his teachings are important. The boy's father called from the doorway, and he hurried away, waving to Max and bowing quickly to Emma. Other pupils left. The class, which was still except for the gentle sound of the air conditioner. Monday, hanging the final man on the wall rack, Max inquired. Emma nodded and told Max not to be late. She thought carefully about what she was saying and said, "The hardest opponent you'll ever face is the person you used to be outside the studio window." An older man in a denim jacket and a familiar hat watched from across the street, partially hidden by the shadow of an oak tree, seeing his granddaughter teaching and the former bully now learning. He nodded once in quiet approval before turning to the walkway, leaving no evidence that he had ever been inside. Emma kept systematically setting up her training gear for her upcoming class, her movements flowing with unconsciously graceful grace. She was leaving behind a legacy that was far more potent than any name or reputation. The knowledge that true strength comes from transformation rather than dominance, from force applied but restrained. It was 12:07 p.m. on the studio clock.